where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective. Other than the Native American Indians, Americans of African descent have always had a relationship with land and soil. Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. I'm Larry Lane White, and I am your host. As farmers, Americans of African descent have traditionally been the builders, the producers, the cultivators, and the harvesters of American agriculture. So it only seems natural that African Americans can and should lead the pack in engaging food sovereignty and agriculture as a part of the strategy of dismantling of systemic oppression and racism. Before the COVID-19 crisis began, there were more than 37 million people living in a food insecure household. Before research data was taken and cultivated by feedingamerica.org, it was revealed that the United States, particularly in the South, recorded the lowest food insecurity rates since before the Great Depression. And this includes more than 11 million children. Systemic inequalities and inequities that face communities of color, even when the economy is strong, are particularly visible during a time of crisis. With over 49,000 Black farmers in important swing states like Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, this election, our presidential election, will be an important one. The question I have tonight is why? Why is it that with federal programming, we're still seeing 82% of African American farmers that are experiencing a decline in revenue just due to the coronavirus pandemic? Why is that? What is the effectiveness of the coronavirus relief program? Well, tonight, I have invited some established farmers to engage in this discussion while waving their banners in Black farming. And we're just going to get started with Mr. Calvin Foster. Why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself and just a little bit about your history in farming. Mr. Foster?
Hey, good afternoon, Dr. White. Good afternoon, panelists and everyone who is out in the viewing audience. Really quickly about me, I'm a Georgia-born native. I'm a retired Marine of 20 years in the military. I currently work at the Department of Veteran Affairs to help our veterans. I'm a licensed real estate agent. I am a minister of the gospel. I'm a father of one. My wife is a chiropractor, so we own a practice here in Atlanta. And one of the things I like to do is make things grow. So giving a shout out to my grandmother who taught me all those things. And I spend my spare time really helping people to grow things in small urban spaces. So I'm glad to be here this afternoon. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. We're glad to have you. Mr. and Mrs. Jones, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing in farming?
Well, we're Tony and Belinda Jones. We're located on St. Helens Island. In fact, Hahana Dadu. We are both Gullah Geechee descendants. In fact, Calvin is also Gullah Geechee, but he won't tell you that. We're on a 12.4 acre. We're on 12.4 acres. We only farm about 1 acre of it. I am also a retiree. I'm from the main branch, the Army. I'm also a minister of the gospel, and we have both my wife and I have ties. Both our families had plots, which was common in okay introduction. So which was common in our neck of the woods. So that's I am right there. I want to pull my coattail.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm sorry, Mr. Juhan-Arnold. Did I pronounce that correctly? I hope I did.
Juhan.
And Juhan-Arnold, please introduce yourself and tell us a lot about yourself, just a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Katherine Juhan-Arnold. I run Baby Katie's Farm and Kitchen, and we're a nonprofit located in Snellville, Georgia, where we try to fight some of that food insecurity and eliminate food waste. I've been doing this since 2014, technically, but it's been a business since 2017. That's about it. I also still have my 9 to 5 where I work as applications engineer for a global industry that I'm not allowed to name on social media.
That's okay. That's okay. We don't want to get you in trouble tonight.
Yeah.
We want to make waves in the farming industry, so we're going to do that by jumping into. And for those who don't know, Angela Lee is one of my correspondents. She's one of my special correspondents, and she's just going to be joining us tonight, just as a support to our conversation as well as our technical platform. And so we're going to go right into, and there's some very specific reasons why I invited this particular panel. And it has a lot to do with their background, in addition to their expertise, but just their background. You've heard a little bit about, the main branch being the Army, and then we've got a Marine. So we've got, a lot of connections here. And so I'm hoping that that's going to help round out our discussion. But with over 49,000 Black farmers in these swing states, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida, can we talk a little bit about why this particular, we're going to start out being political for a second. Why is this important? We've got representation here from South Carolina. We've got representation here from Georgia, at least 2 out of the 3 states. So why is this election important? Anybody?
Go ahead, Calvin.
Okay, well, I think it's important for a lot of reasons. I think that in this election, we really have an opportunity here to really address why we're having this panel in the first place. And that is to look at some of the systemic issues that have historically been faced by Black farmers. And I was reading an article last week that talked about, the development of farming in America, and about 17% of all American land was given away for free, pretty much for free, and costing no more than the fees for the filing of the land. So in many aspects, African Americans were not allowed to participate in that process. So what we have here is a systemic evolution of events that have really put Black farmers at a disadvantage. And in times like this, I think that we need to hold the ground that we have. Our votes are important, and we have a chance here to rally together and to really make our voices heard for legislature that can actually really address the issues that minorities and Black Americans have faced in the land ownership, that whole perspective there.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah. It's very important. Not only, first thing, it's not just a Democratic problem. It's not just a Republican problem. Both parties have deficiencies. Both parties have not belly up to the bar and done what they should have done to support Black farmers with the support to the USDA. We even in 2020, we still have to scrape and fight for funding for on our farms. Secondly, it's a joke to come out with a stimulus plan that gives low loans. Farmers don't need the loans; they need grants. I mean, they already have already auctioned, got the financing up to the yazoo on the equipment and stuff.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, you're telling them, okay, we're gonna give you a loan
Yeah.
that you now notice this, that you may not have to pay back.
Mhm.
That key word is may not, which actually means if they want to pull it back and won't have you pay it, you're gonna have to pay it. And so it's just how you color the dots to make things look favorable for you. Farmers, you can't do without us. If you think you can, let us stop growing our crops for a week
Or raising animals.
or raising animals and see how hungry you'll be.
Mm-hmm.
Because farmers are actually the backbone of this country. And if black farmers and farmers of color, if we want to take it from a historical standpoint, that's one of the reasons why we were brought over from Africa, especially for the cotton and the rice, because we were growing it and we know how to grow it.
Right. Well, that's why I was saying, from the just that our ancestors were really built the agriculture as we know it in the United States.
Mhm.
Anybody else have a perspective on that?
Without getting too political, because as a nonprofit, I'm not allowed to speak on certain things. I'm gonna say, to piggyback off of both of them, I'm gonna say it's very important right now that we get out and vote. That being said, I'm gonna be devil's advocate here. I don't really want to be pacified. I feel like Black people have done more for themselves over these past 4 years than we have in a long time, and given both parties, what are we really getting? Especially when it pertains to Black farmers. Even now, we weren't considered for the beginning of the EIDL loan. Why wasn't agriculture included? You just have to, yeah, I can say that. You got to decide what's best for you and what it is. How do you want your future to look? Because that's what we need to think about going to these polls in November.
And if I can also chime in once again too, it's not just the presidential election is important. Those congressional seats, because they're the ones in Congress is where the laws are made and the legislation is developed. And if you don't have someone that's got your back from the congressional seat and as well as the local seats, the president's only going to be there for 4 years, but most of the congressmen, look at them, they are there several terms.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that does make a difference. And so when I looked at the website, visited the website early in the week, Feeding America website, which a lot of people, are saying is somewhat biased, but they're reporting that, well, before I even get to Feeding America, let's talk about the study given right here in Georgia, at the University of Georgia. More than 800 African-American farmers found that 82% of Black farmers are seeing a decline in their revenue just as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. So my question is to you guys: have you all seen a decline? And if you haven't, then can you talk about what might be happening in the situations with the other 800 or so farmers?
Well, you really have a change in, talking to a lot of farmers here that I know in Georgia, you have a change in the way that we are feeding people. So what we have here is sort of a breakdown in the system, because when you really look at it, we're talking about transportation and the logistics behind moving food and where it goes. And so much of what was grown, I mean, it was going to schools and to kids that were in school all day. Well, now everyone's home. So the whole school food infrastructure is broken. And so kids are home. And so now, how do you get that same amount of food, which was a lot, to kids that are in school at home? So the infrastructure has really changed. So what I'm seeing here is, yeah, if you've lost revenue, that was sort of the reason why the infrastructure was not there, because it melted down with the corona. But what I am seeing here is a perfect opportunity for the urban farmer. My demand has gone up. I have people knocking down my doors, asking questions that are having me on talks like this. So the demand for the small farm, the self-sustaining farmer, has gone through the roof. The urban spaces, those spaces that are 5 and 10 acres and less, it has just blown itself away. And I think that's a good thing, because one of the things that I see is that we uh, sort of bought into this culture of letting the government, Monsanto and DuPont and Dole, really provide our food for us. And when we did that, we shifted away from the farm. And as I talk to young people, it's a cultural change. We don't want to farm anymore. We don't want to be in dirt. Well, slaves are free. We don't want to do that anymore. We don't want to be in the dirt and getting dirty. Well, you tied your hands behind your back, because now that the system collapses, you're dependent on a system who now has you've given control over. So me, I'm a military guy. I think like a Marine. Go into a situation with nothing and be able to survive. I can go completely 100% off the grid. If we lost power, we lost water, then I'm going to be here. And so what I'm doing is telling people to really adjust the way you operate in the system and become more self-sustaining, become more self-sufficient. Because if those trucks ain't rolling, I don't care. We're going to be okay over here.
Right, right. And what the pandemic, I've said it earlier in the summer, what the pandemic is really showing us is how delicate the food.
Exactly. I think I understood that a few years ago when we had the gas shortage.
Mhm.
When we had the gas shortage here, when the gas stopped coming into Atlanta, and me and my wife were riding around for a couple of hours trying to find some gas, I said, you know what? We're sitting ducks. That will never happen. It really opened my eyes to a lot of things, to not be so dependent on the system for someone to feed me. We're talking about basic survival here. So, I can really, I'm sort of a prepper type of guy. So I don't want to get too deep into my ideology, but I don't want my next meal to be dependent on some guy in Florida and whether he can crank up his truck or not. That's not a plan. That's no plan at all.
Right. Well, and I have to remind everyone that Perspectives On is a forum where we can voice our perspectives and our ideologies without, and it's a safe space without being judged. And I do, at the same time, we do respect the notion that we do work other jobs and we have
Right.
other associations, so we have to but it is a forum, it is an open forum, and so you have that freedom. Miss,
We found that the farmers that were having the most difficult times when the pandemic hit were the larger farms that primarily had one crop that they were trying to get out, and the smaller or more diverse the operation was, the more you had to offer the local customer who was having a hard time going to finding a shopping venue. So when the farmers market closed here, that we primarily were vendors with, it caused us to find other ways to reach our customers, and in a way, it was even less wasteful for us, and because to prepare to go to a farmer's market, you're gathering and harvesting various amounts of your crops to take to present to the public. And what we ended up doing was taking orders. And so everyone who placed an order gave us a specific amount that we knew that they were going to purchase. It was not that we weren't picking beyond what was needed. So everything that wasn't going to be sold, if an order wasn't placed for it, it wasn't picked. It was left in the field for so it was available the next time a customer contacted us. We began offering. We didn't actually do a CSA, but we started offering packages where we told everybody what we had available, what we could offer, and they could order a large, smaller, or extra large package. And we found that benefited us quite well. And rather than having for a few weeks as we made the adjustment, it was the transition was a little rough. But once we made the transition and the customers saw that we were still available and they could come to the farm and pick up things from us, then business just kind of went through the roof. We were excited about, being able to meet people's needs. We had people contacting us through our websites, through Instagram, to say, hey, and Facebook to say, hey, I heard that you're still open. We want to contact you and see what you have available. We're posting on all of our social media what we have available. And they say, hey, we like that. Can we order it? So things picked up for us. And but for the large farms who just had maybe one or two crops that they were, trying to get into the schools or some other places, that was surely a problem. Some of the local restaurants that we were selling to, they were no longer available, but our customer base picked up. So from the individual families, so that, helped us out a lot.
In fact, I think that the virus in itself, the pandemic in itself has, for Black folks, folks of color, have forced us to go back to what Calvin said, to our survival skills. If you think back about 10, 15 years ago, just about everybody had, especially if you were in the rural area, you had a little plot. You had somewhere where you grew some peas, or depending on what was the season, you had something in the ground to help ends meet.
Yeah.
The problem was, we got so, as we would say in the country, you got so solidified that that you thought you couldn't work and get your hands dirty, and talk about, I can't get out there because the sun hot. Well, guess what? A lot of folks out in the sun now, and it's definitely hot. And what makes matters even worse, you hungry, but we've got stuff to that, no matter if we just have meatless dinners, we still got some vegetables on the table.
Right. That's right. And I tried to convince a lot of farmers to, even before the pandemic, from a business standpoint. Now, most of my background is in church administration. I hold what they consider to be a MBA in church, meaning that, I can, I know how to administrate, large churches. And from a business standpoint, I tried to convince a lot of farmers even before the pandemic, hey, get yourself a website, sell your stuff online. And a lot of farmers felt that, that the bigger things, focus on one and get you a contract, and so now a lot of people are seeing the benefit of having that website. And especially if your produce, if you have a specialized produce, like my friends up in Virginia that all they do is strawberries, they have a whole line of strawberries. So, there's a market for that. There's a market for fresh fruit. But if you sell it online, you can get me. It's already been tried and proved. You have a online retail just takes off. Just takes off like a rocket.
And in addition to that, it's getting tied up to just about every state has, in fact, every state has a Department of Ag, and the part of the Department of Ag, especially South Carolina, is they have a program called South Carolina Grown. We had customers contact us because we took that few minutes to fill out the application, to share what we have and what we had available and what we grow. We had customers during this pandemic had reached out to the South Carolina Department of Ag to find out who in my area is growing vegetables or growing products that I can tap into. And as a result, they tapped into us, and they are full-time customers now.
Yeah, it does take a lot of organization to really get it down, but once you do, it really benefits you. Miss Juhan-Arnold.
Yeah,
I'll get it right one day. So you have a perspective, because you've been your entire business model is kind of similar to all of that, right? So, I mean, did you see a decline or did you take off?
well, we took off. The demand took off.
Oh,
The revenue declined, definitely. We made
really?
a fifth of what we made last year. But because of who we are, we're getting questions like, hey, how do we grow this? Hey, we want to put something in our backyard. Hey, can you help us set this up? And then there's also been the people who lost their job during the beginning of this whole virus. And they're like, hey, we can barely afford our electric bill this month. Can you help us out with some food? And it was really tough for us to manage because we already have 40 families that we feed. So we had to expand our summer crops when we weren't really sure how coronavirus spread. It was tough, especially signing that new lease in March for the space in Snellville. We were going back and forth between Snellville and Deep Step, just trying to plan everything out and get people taken care of. So right now, we actually did the same thing the Joneses did with our packages. We didn't have a summer CSA, although we're leaning toward a fall CSA. We just did packages like, hey, what do you want? Order it through our website and pick what it is you need. But the revenue has definitely gone down. But that, to me, it doesn't matter as long as people have food on the tables and in their bellies.
So
Because
why
out
do you
here
feel
hurting.
like your revenue actually went down if your demand went up?
Because we're giving away food as opposed to selling it. So our it literally has gone down. We made a fifth this year of what we made last year. I actually just did the numbers a few days ago. So revenue is down, but the demand has increased substantially. I think it's 423%. And that's just people. And my whole model when I came into this was grow your own. So most of our revenue from the beginning was people buying plants instead of food so that they could start their own garden. And it's really been, it's been making me feel good because I like to see people take on that. Let me do it myself. Let me figure out how to grow this. It makes me happy.
Okay, all right. So maybe some adjustments in the business model.
Right.
Possibly.
Yeah,
Possibly.
yeah.
That's a whole nother market. So that's one of the areas one of the spaces I'm moving into is that in many cases we have lost a lot of this knowledge as we heard earlier that growing up everybody had a garden space. I really couldn't ride through Southeast Georgia without seeing in the fall everybody had a couple of rows of collard greens, everybody had some peas growing. You would see some corn, everybody grew tomatoes. And so you don't really see that as much now. And so in many cases that skill in this younger generation is lost. And what I find myself doing a lot is garden consulting. It is really passing back down that information that has fundamentally skipped a generation.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Yeah. A lot of this younger generation, they just aren't into it. But what my prayer is that through this platform we can actually educate people and just kind of create some awareness that, hey, you know, this is an option for you as opposed to relying on mass production
Right.
and in America's capitalistic, business structure.
Right.
So definitely. Um, The other thing that I wanted us to kind of talk about is making sure that because we know that those coronavirus relief programs are available. Uh, why did you find that they were accessible to you? And if were they helpful? I know Mr. Jones said a little bit earlier that they did provide what they call loans. Well, the USDA is always given a loan. That's part of their relief structure is loans, and they make it harder, from my view, to get grants, and they make it easy for you to get a loan, but then you have to jump through an extra hoop to get a grant. So, did you guys find that the relief programs uh, were helpful to you at all?
So for me, my experience with the USDA was not that great. So starting with the grants, well, you don't get the grants unless you have the land. And so the first thing that is the barrier is the entry point. And so we're talking about already established farms, but we also need to look at the blockages to entering the farm program, because that's what I wanted to do years ago, but I couldn't. And so one of the grants was that they would give you through the FSA this 0% money down, low interest loan to even buy the farmland. Well, that program was almost impossible for me because one, yeah, when you're trying to buy the land, you got to get the land tied up in the contract. So I'm a real estate agent. I knew a lot about the contract, but to find someone who worked with the lengthiness of the program. So going through FSA and the USDA to even try to get loans and grants, the process is too long. And so that's what drove a lot of Black farmers out of business. It was going through the rigmaroles and the round the block stuff. They had white farmers get loans in 30 days. Well, Black farmers, it was taking them 6 months. Well, 6 months, you missed the whole growing season. So
Right.
you now you got to go find a loan to try to keep yourself in business, and that's basically how the USDA drove a lot of Black farmers out of business. And so you have to look at the history and the Pigford and Boyd lawsuit and all that stuff, and understand what really happened, because it was inflicted by the government. It wasn't, we settled for how many $billions it was here recently under Obama and Bush. So you have to really look at the history and understand that there needs to be more representation. One of the points I brought up was there need to be more representation of the people who are going to use the loans or the grants at the table when the thing is written. So I tried to use USDA and FSA, and it was impossible. I couldn't, because nobody, once I told somebody, well, I'm gonna use the FSA loan to buy your land, they're like, no, you're not, because I already know what FSA is. It takes way too long. It's 6 months playing around, and I don't have the type of time. So then they wanted you to have 3 years of farming experience. And okay, if I don't have the land to farm, how do I get in? So it's a lot of how these loans and grants are structured. Even the people from the USA was like, you know what, about 90% of the loans or people that apply, they don't get through. They told me straight up, go to Ag South or Georgia Farm Credit and try somewhere else. It's probably not going to work for you. So the entry points and the red tape to get to it's just like, John was saying, Tony was saying earlier, we don't need loans. You need to be granting this money. You gave the rest of the money away. You gave the rest of the land away. We don't need loans. We need grants. And then the process has got to be easier than that. The process blocks now that the people are supposed to help out.
True.
So, Mrs. Jones, was there something that you wanted to say? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that we found that in order to go through the steps and the procedures, assistance from our local extension service. So, for example, South Carolina State University's extension, the 1890 extension, our local regional farm agent, Mr. Ishmael Washington, who's over the Low Country region here, has regular meetings with the farmers that regional office is serving, and keeps us up to date with information that's really helpful to us about applying for loans and or applying for grants. And so we were really thankful to be able to connect with them, and the small business development office on the campus of South Carolina State has also been helping the farmers who are involved in the extension to navigate through steps if they're willing to take that make the move to apply for a loan. They're there to help out or to apply for a grant. So it's been they've been very helpful, and we appreciate the assistance that they've given us. And we did not find that the new stimulus package was going to benefit us. We weren't growing the crops that they were, really looking at helping farmers with, and with our size, we didn't seem to fit into the packages that they were offering. So we just, for right now, we're not pursuing them. There's a workshop coming up sometime soon that we're going to, look at attending to see if maybe we should rethink that. But right now, our stance is no. We're not right now. It doesn't seem to be the best fit for us.
It's for big.
Right.
It's the same model that the economic stimulus went to. It's for big pocket, big size, couple thousand acre farms. It doesn't reach. To me, it just doesn't reach down to the average, everyday farmer. It's for big. It's corporation money. So no, it doesn't help.
So, Ms. Kathy.
It is corporation money. It is corporation money, but that's where being a small corporation comes in handy. So we're structured as a nonprofit, but we're also a corporation. So the Ag South, Farm Credit, USDA, FSA, they were no help to me in the beginning at all. It wasn't until I actually had the honor and the pleasure of interviewing our current agricultural commissioner, and I let him know my grievances up front. I was like, hey, guy, this isn't working for me, and I don't know what to do at this point. I've CC'd everybody on every email. I've been to all my offices that are supposed to support me, and they're not supporting me. And it wasn't until, that was this past December, and it wasn't until I let him know what was going on that I got a response back. And I got some apology emails. And I was very thankful to him for even listening to me and reaching out to the people that I told him about. But that's when I started to gain some traction. With the current stimulus package that's being offered, we were able to get the EIDL. However, the PPP loan has been our biggest issue, and that's supposed to be the forgivable one. But it's like when you're a farm, you have seasonal workers. And even though I think the third time they rewrote the Paycheck Protection Program, they included seasonal workers, the banks and the credit unions still aren't honoring that. And it's like, hey, well, these people work during a certain time. We do have an off season. They don't care. They want to see a year of full employees, and that's the only way you're going to get the money. Even though the SBA approved us, the bank was like, no. The credit union was like, no. And even with our EIDL, I believe I've heard some horror stories from people, and it's because of a systemic issue. If your credit score is going to stop you from getting an EIDL loan, then that needs to be looked at, because when it comes to Black people, we don't have the best credit. We don't know how to get there, and we've been blocked from getting there in the past. So for you to say that my credit score is going to stop me from getting the money I need to keep my business open, somebody needs to review that. Obviously.
And explain to us, for the viewers, including myself, what is the EIDL?
It was the economic disaster loan, the first one that went out. So it's basically covering your operating expenses.
Okay.
To cover all of that.
So EIDL stands for, do you know?
Economic injury disaster loan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so it was interesting to see, to hear the testimonies of different farmers to see how the coronavirus pandemic relief was actually working. Earlier in the summer, I did hear some good things about the paycheck protection plan, but not necessarily from farmers, from other persons, especially people that were operating churches. I heard some good things about that. And so um, this new trend now, and I just want to get y'all's perspective on this in urban farming, because there's some. I mean, right here in my neighborhood, there's probably about five. I can just name a half dozen urban farms right here in my neighborhood here in West Atlanta, in Northwest Atlanta. And so urban farming has been termed as an innovative way to build community and fight food insecurity. But the reality is that inner city farming is not really new. I can remember my great grandmother who lived in a housing project here in Atlanta, Grady Homes housing project in Atlanta, along with a lot of her friends. They grew that what was very popular back then was to grow collard greens and tomatoes right in the backyard of their housing, their government housing apartments. So inner city farming is not a new thing, but it is kind of taken off. And so so I call it a spinoff of our ancestral rural farm. Can you guys elaborate on the significance of farming in our culture? And this is a time when you can really talk about your history, because each of you has a unique history, and just really just talk about the significance of farming in the African American culture. Anybody?
Well, I know Tony and I both grew up with, especially grandparents who had large garden plots, and I grew up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and Tony grew up here in Beaufort County in Burton. So, and now we both we're together here on St. Helena Island, but it was nothing. It wasn't anything strange about my grandparents telling me, "Oh, let's go down to the field and pick some greens, or pick some green beans, or bring in some tomatoes, harvest some squash, some okra." There were fruit trees everywhere. There were pecans, and pecans, and black walnuts, muscadines, pear trees. We had something for every season, and we never ran out of anything. And my grandfather made sure that we knew how to plant. We planted alongside him. So there was that special and purposeful instruction on, you need to know how to grow food. And Tony had the same type of background, growing up here in Beaufort County. So when we it was a merger of the two. We both knew that we wanted to have a garden every year, and we wanted our children to know how to garden. And as a part of our home, when we began homeschooling, that became a part of our curriculum. And we incorporated even 4-H animal and food raising projects, so that the kids could participate in those projects that encouraged them, along with our encouragement, to know how to grow food and be sustainable and preserve their own, you need to survive. And it's just been a part of what we've known. And we don't know how it skipped some generations. We look around now and we don't see that many people having gardens. And we're like, well, what happened? What generation, what in your family skipped telling you about a garden? How did that? It's like unbelievable. I can't believe, that some people don't know about it. But
Right. But it's hard work, though. It's hard work.
But it's so profitable to see things growing. The putting your hand in the soil and the benefit of it's almost like a stress relief for some people to be out there working the soil and putting that seed in the ground and watching for the date, when it germinates and saying, oh, wow, look at that, knowing that the anticipation of that, the fruit or that vegetable to that you're going to eat it and enjoy it and share it. It was another thing that you grew things not just for your family, you grew it to share. It was a community. It was like your responsibility to your neighbors, that if they didn't have a garden, or if there was a family that had some family members who were, had some disability or whatever, you looked out for them. You weren't just growing for yourself. You were growing extra for people in your neighborhood. And that tie was a bind, because people knew, hey, I can go to Miss, my grandmother's name was Gladys. I can go by Miss Gladys and she always had something available, or my grandfather always had something available. If it weren't some, eggs from the chickens, or when they did butchering, when it was hog butchering season, if the community knew that they were going to get a piece of meat. They were going to get something. They were going to get some sausage, or there were certain people who just knew if they would come and help. I want to help Mr. Herman. I want to help because I want to get a piece of that hog. So it was a community thing. It was a helping one another, and that's a breakdown that we have right now. And I think there is a resurgence, and it is, like you said, it's not new, but it's resurging. It's coming back, and it's a good thing to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we really need to see a lot more of.
Totally agree.
I suppose I'll jump in now. Just like Mr. Jones said earlier, we were brought over here because of our expertise in agriculture. And the only reason, well, I won't say the only reason, but the main reason the non-Black people know how to farm right now is because our great-great-greats taught them. They watched us. We were in those fields. We were doing what we had to do to make sure we lived the next day. Mm-hmm. And it really is nice to see people come into their own. The farming or growing your own food skipped my mother's generation. I'm actually named after my great-grandmother, Catherine Elizabeth Etchison. And she passed away right before my 5th birthday. But my grandmother was like, come over here. You're going to learn this. Get here. And her thing was flour. She still, to this day, I can get her to grow some herbs, but she will not grow fruits or vegetables to save her life. So she's like, Kia, where's my okra? Where's my corn? And she depends on me for all of her food. And but it was her, and I was resistant. I was a 5-year-old, 6-year-old who was just like, no, this is taking too long. It's not growing. Nothing's coming out of the ground. It's a week later, and I still don't see anything to do. So she made me a flower bed full of impatience. She was like, here, this is your bed. And then right after you, there you go. Mm-hmm. And it didn't come back to me until I might have been 22, maybe 23, when everything started coming back. And I was the only person in my community with a garden. And these kids were hungry, and they came to my house and they were just like, hey, you got food. Can we eat? I was a cool mom, apparently. So, Xbox, PlayStation, they were at my house all the time and eating my dinner all the time. And I had to have a conversation with their parents, like, hey, where are y'all? What's going on? What do you need? And that's when I figured out our community was really struggling. Mm-hmm. I had to encourage people, like, hey, it takes nothing. Just stick this seed in the ground and water it every day. That's all you got to do. Talk to it. It'll come up for you.
So. And what I found interesting too, I was reading a book called Freedom Farmers by Dr. Monica White, and she talked a lot about how back in those, back in our grandparents' days and our great-grandparents' days, they really used that community that y'all are speaking about as a means by which to to kind of break that barrier of racism, and just kind of be a support to those families that were being victimized by the system. And so it's good to hear those testimonies. Mr. Foster, I know you are a bit radical in your position on it, but I know you have a perspective on what is it? So just answer the question: what is it that fuels your passion for having that relationship with the land?
It is I always say, a people's heritage and their pride is in their land. It was a point of reference for me as I traveled the world, to think about a place that I could go where it was my own. So I was raised on a little homestead. It's been in my family for 7 generations, over 100 years, and it's still standing, and we still have it. And so it was a lot that I learned there under my grandmother. So we grew pretty much or raised what we ate. And so we had our own cow, we had our own chickens, we had our own pigs. We bought pigs in November. You shot them in March, and you shot them in November. And I remember, we had what's called a deep freezer,
Yeah.
and it was maybe that freezer was probably about 6 or 7 feet long. It was a giant thing. It was huge, and it was tall. So that it was not like the freezers we have today, because people don't store food like that anymore. But my grandmother was always. I remember all these jars. I would sneak in and open a can of preserves and some pear or peach or fig preserves, and I would get a whipping because I opened it, but I didn't know. I didn't know how I was getting caught. I didn't know that when you twisted the top and the lid popped, that it was open and somebody could tell. So, I stick my fingers in here, eat some preserve, and try to close it back up like nobody would know. But grandma would come and, yeah, there you go. So grandma would come and check the mason jar and see that the lid had been popped, and she would know somebody had been in there. And so, I grew up with stories like that. My grandmother only had a third-grade education. But she knew a lot about how to live and how to farm the land and how to put her. She even had a trick they call banking sweet potatoes,
Yes.
where they would dig holes in the ground, giant holes in the ground, and pack it with straw, pack it with
Right.
sweet potatoes, pack it with straw again, put plastic over so rain couldn't get in. And those sweet potatoes would be in there all year long.
Year long.
And so if we didn't have refrigeration, if we didn't have shelves, we would go to the earth back in the ground and we pull out what we'd harvested. Rows and rows of peas and peaches and pears and chickens running everywhere. I got to pick eggs before I go to school. So I learned all of that there, and it was just some of the my grandmother was also the mother of the church. And so we were in church every Friday night till 1 o'clock in the morning. I had to be there all day on Sunday, and so, prayer meeting on Wednesday. Somebody done caught the Holy Ghost and we got to stay in here longer. So, it was a real connection. It was a very serious connection. And even throughout my 20 years of military travels, I always longed to be back. I was, 6 or 7 thousand miles away from home, but I long to touch that red Georgia clay and get my hands back in that dirt, because it made me that hard work. I didn't know we was poor, dirt poor, but because we were rich in spirit, and a lot of it came from that connection to the land. And so, what I think we have here is a cultural shift. As Black people, we got more money and got a little bit, as Tony said, a little bit more sedity. And we ain't got to work in this dirt no more. We can just we can go to Popeyes and get us some chicken. And so, so and,
Hard work.
that right. And
You saw those pictures of me down at Cepalo Island.
I saw you out there. I saw you out there sweating.
Yeah,
But
I was sweat. It was dirty.
but but just like just like Belinda said,
My friends is, they sit up in $500,000 houses and they drive $90,000 car. They ain't trying to get dirty like that.
right.
I had so much fun doing that.
It is.
Really to what you guys are talking about putting your hands in the dirt, and that
Yeah.
it's very therapeutic. It's like an energy that
Mhm.
and I
There's
I'm
a
of,
spirit to it. There's
I'm,
a spirit to it.
I'm of the mindset that the ancestors speak to us through that soil when we put our
There's
hands
a spirit associated with it.
right. And people, and for people that don't really, have not exposed themselves to that, especially persons of color, then I say they're missing out. I said they're
Mm.
missing out. So as we get ready to close, because I want us to, really be able to offer something for viewers and listeners who might be feeling inspired to start their own garden. What advice would you give to them on where and how to start? Just one thing.
My number one thing is grow what you love. Grow what you love to eat, because when you grow what you love to eat, you're going to take care of it. If you grow radishes and you've never eaten a radish before in your life, you don't care about it, you don't know what it is, it's not going to make you happy. You're not going to take care of it. You don't want to see it come out of the ground. But if you grow blueberries and you love blueberries, you're going to take care of that plant because you want to eat your blueberries. So my number one
No.
thing is grow what you love to
Okay.
eat when
All
you're
right.
And I
talking
would say
about food.
start small. Don't think you have to have a giant project to begin with. Start small, even if it's with just a few containers. Grow and find success, small amounts of success, and then build upon it. So you're not so maybe not quickly feel defeated. Start with something like your sister said. Just start with something you like, but start small and watch it grow and enjoy it, and then start another project. But don't start really big and then feel like, oh, this is too hard, this is too much. So I would that would be my suggestion.
Okay. All right, Mr. Foster.
I would say get serious. Um, I know a lot about farming. Some of it I learned from grandma and and around the farm, but most of what I know, even on a molecular level of uptake of which chemicals bind with what chemicals to make a plant do a certain thing, about 90% of that I learned on YouTube, and the information is just a lot out there. But if you want to know something about a particular plant, then the information is out there, and it's free. So get pretty serious about farming. Yeah, it's cute. I grew my little tomato plant. I got one tomato this year. No, sort of get serious about it. And the information and knowledge is there, and it's for the taking. So you can definitely make that happen.
All right, Mr. Aaron Ruffin. We hope we have certainly inspired you to get out there and grow something. Again, grow what you love. Start small. Don't think you have to start big, and definitely take Mr. Foster's advice, and you'll see that you'll have that relationship, and you'll know exactly what we're talking about. We're gonna have more shows on farming, on African American farming, and its significance, because that's something that's very close to my heart, as well as a lot of different people. And I think there is definitely a culture shift that is happening as a result of the pandemic. The pandemic has uncovered, like my grandmama used to say, it's just like when how the roaches act when company comes. It's it comes out. So we're
Yeah.
definitely going through a cultural shift, and I love to see God move, and I think
Amen.
God's moving in a great way when it comes to farming, especially African American farming. Now, um,
Amen.
we're going to go ahead and sign off. I want to say thank everyone for listening in. A special thanks to Keystone Public Radio. And as we leave this broadcast, please remember those famous words from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, that whatever affects one of us affects us all in total. Okay. Good night, everyone. And we're going to close out with our standard end.
Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your